Saturday is Armistice Day and Veterans Day in the United States. Every year on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, there is silence. It's a moment for mournful reflection and for gratitude to the many millions of people who sacrificed their lives in the First World War and wars since. This year, war is on all of our minds, and with bitter irony, it's putting Palestinian supporters on a collision course with many British people. Tens of thousands of pro-Palestine protesters will march through London on Armistice Day. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, says that's unacceptable. The Israeli president, on this show yesterday, joined calls for the march to be banned.
It's atrocious and hypocritical, and I call upon all decent human beings to object to the march and ban it, because the symbol of that day is a symbol of victory, and it's a symbol of doing good, because when you fight evil, sometimes you have to fight. You have to fight evil in order to uproot evil.
Well, I'll be honest now. My initial instinct about this march was to agree that it should be banned. November the 11th is a sacred and emotional day. There's plenty of evidence that some of the people joining these protests have no respect for our traditions or our values. Yes, it's a minority, but some have called for jihad, some have defaced our monuments, some have chanted for the total eradication of Israel. The idea this could happen on a weekend of remembrance and respect is frankly sickening, and it risks bringing tensions to the boil. But so does the incendiary rhetoric from people like our Home Secretary.
We've seen now tens of thousands of people take to the streets following the massacre of Jewish people, the single largest loss of Jewish life since the Holocaust, chanting for the erasure of Israel from the map. To my mind, there's only one way to describe those marches. They are hate marches. Now,
you see, I don't think they are hate marches. I think many of the people taking part believe they're marching for peace, for an armistice. There are some there, clearly, who are hateful. But we already have laws against violence, against inciting hatred, and against supporting terrorists. Anyone who shows up with those things in mind should be swiftly arrested, and the police must do more to do their police work. But should the ugly behaviour of a minority, and I believe it is a minority, mean we just throw away our hard-fought rights to free speech? This is what Lord Nicholas Soames, the grandson of Sir Winston Churchill, said yesterday.
A lot of people died during the war to assert freedom. I think it must be allowed to go ahead. It's nowhere near the cenotaph. It's in the afternoon. It's our thing. And most of those people, 90% of those people, are not there to make trouble. They're there to express a deeply held view.
It really made me think, especially coming from the grandson of Winston Churchill, the man who saved this country from the Nazis. And of course, hearing it from Lord Soames reminded me of the words of his grandfather, which in fact take pride of place on my dressing room wall here in the studio of Piers Morgan Uncensored. Some people's idea of free speech is that they are free to say what they like, but if anyone says anything back, that is an outrage. It's Winston Churchill. And that's really the point here. If the people calling for a ban on this march actually agreed with the protesters, they wouldn't have a problem with it. But freedom of speech works both ways. Winston Churchill fought in the First World War and led us to victory in the Second. The many millions who died were fighting for the free world we now live in and the freedom of speech and expression that we live by. So I respect the rights of Palestinian supporters to march peacefully on Armistice Day. I just hope they return that favour and respect the people who died so that they can. Well, first tonight, author Douglas Murray has been one of Israel's most passionate and scathing supporters since this war began. He's now travelled as a reporter to the Gaza border, from where I spoke to him earlier tonight in what turned out to be a very dramatic interview. Well, I'm joined now by Douglas Murray, who's on the Gaza border. Douglas, let me ask you first of all, why have you felt the need to go there?
Well, I've covered every Israeli conflict since the 2006 Lebanon war. I've covered lots of other conflicts as well, and this one is obviously an incredibly important conflict. It's one that is going to be crucial not just for Israel but for the region, and I like to see these things firsthand, as you know, Piers.
I do, and I've read your stuff for many years about these kind of conflicts. Let me ask you, what's your feeling on the ground there? I know you've been with some of the IDF. What is your feeling about the motivation for this war from the Israeli side? Is it revenge? Is it something different? What are you picking up?
Well, it's not revenge. I mean, I think the most obvious thing is I spent part of today at the kibbutz of Nir Oz. This is a kibbutz right down the road from here by the Gaza border, where there are about 400 residents. 80 of them were kidnapped on the 7th of October, and another 30 to 40 were murdered. And I went through the remains of their houses, saw all the blood-spattered walls, and went through the charred remains of that village, that community. That was just one of the massacre sites. I went earlier past the massacre site of what you'll remember there was a music festival, also near the Gaza border, which was taking place where so many hundreds of young people were having a rave and then were massacred, raped, mutilated, and again kidnapped and taken through the border into Gaza. So you see the remnants of that appalling day everywhere around here. It's very hard to find a family anywhere in Israel that hasn't been directly or very closely related to the atrocities of that day. 1,400 civilians slaughtered in one day and thousands more injured is the sort of thing that will have an effect on any society. It would be roughly comparative to, say, 20,000 people being killed in our own country. So it's a massive thing. It's a massive blow in Israel. The whole nation has felt it. And of course, people know that there needs to be an answer to this. And I think you can hear behind me as I'm speaking some of that answer, the crump of artillery shells and missiles from the air, it seems. And you can see some of that rising over the border behind me.
You talked about proportionality in this conflict being absurd. I've talked a lot about what is proportionate. I've struggled to think of what a proportionate response is to the barbarism of those terror attacks. There is a view, and maybe you share this view, but there is a view, I think Ben Shapiro said this to me when I interviewed him, that there should be no limit on the response that Israel has. It's not about proportion. It's not about you kill one of us, we kill one of you. This is about a war specifically designed to eliminate Hamas, and they will do what it takes.
Yes. Well, I mean, remember that one of the heads of Hamas said only a few days ago from the comfort of his foreign residence, because remember, the heads of Hamas don't live among their peoples. They've been made billionaires by taking in international aid for years now. But one of the heads of Hamas said the other day, we will keep doing October the 7th again and again and again. So there's a realization in Israel, I think, that this is just unlivable. You can't have a situation where you have a neighbor who won the election in 2006 after Israel withdrew from the Gaza, promptly killed their fellow Palestinians, the Fatah members in the Gaza, threw them off buildings and shot them in the back. So Hamas has been ruling Gaza for all the last 1.5 decades. It has spent all the international aid money and much more that has come into it on its own infrastructure of terror tunnels, its infrastructure of rockets and other munitions to throw at Israel, and then, of course, in enriching its leaders. The place you see behind me could be Singapore by now, and there's a reason it isn't, and it's the leadership of Hamas. And so, I think that it is something that people have to realize, that this is not a situation which is sustainable for Israel. And yes, the Israeli government is going to be doing whatever it needs to do to fulfill its objective of ridding the Gaza of Hamas. How easy or difficult a job that is another question, but it's something that is going on as we speak.
But in terms of the moral quandary which I've been feeling, and it's not about Israel wanting to eliminate Hamas, I completely agree with that mission statement. And certainly there's no chance of any peace when you have a terror group in charge of Gaza in the way that they've now completely established themselves to be, with no limits and just a desire to eradicate Israel and as many Jewish people as they can kill. So let's park that to one side. I concur with the mission statement. But it is incredibly difficult, just on a human level, to see, because we know the civilian population in Gaza is half children, to see the sheer numbers of kids who are being killed by the Israeli onslaught that's come back against Hamas. What do you feel about that on a human level? What should we all be feeling about that?
The first thing is, should those deaths really be attributed to the Israeli side? We saw the other day, the BBC and other media reported that the people who were lying dead on the street on one of the main routes through Gaza was alleged to be a massacre carried out by Israelis. It turned out it wasn't the case at all. It was Hamas massacring Palestinians fleeing south, as the Israelis had recommended they do. So the question, in a way, that you ask, I would say there's an answer to, which is who exactly is responsible for these deaths? If you do, as Hamas does, decide to build bunkers and put rockets on them and then put hospitals on top of them, who exactly is responsible for that? Is it the Israelis and their response, or is it Hamas for doing that? If you do decide, as Hamas has done, to use all of these billions of dollars of international aid to build tunnels where you can hide, among other things, the kidnapped Israelis, who's responsible for the strikes that happen as a result and any civilian deaths? Is it the Israelis or is it Hamas, who has been holding the Palestinian peoples of the Gaza hostage for the last 15 years and more? Again, I repeat this point. You know, a lot of what has been said about this seems to suggest that Hamas has no responsibility for this. You know, if you went into your neighbor's house, ransacked it, raped your neighbors, killed some of them, took others into captivity, and then somebody said, that's not on, I'm going to do something in retaliation to that, you would bear the cost of that. You'd bear the price for that. The Israelis have the right to respond to such an atrocity. And I'm rather surprised, or at least I'm not surprised in a way, I'm disappointed as ever by the number of commentators in the UK and elsewhere who always use times like this to say things like, we've got to you know, this is a time for judicious voices, this is a time for calm and much more. I do always wonder if those people would say the same or feel the same if it was a bit closer to their own home. You know, if it wasn't a kibbutz down the road, like the one I was in earlier that had been attacked, but you know, village after village in the south of England, I don't think we'd be hearing those same voices. I think there's a very particular standard that the Israelis are held to. I think it's an unfair standard, it's an unequal standard, it's an intolerable standard for the Israelis. But when people say, you know, you've just got to sort of live with this, the Israelis quite rightly will be saying, well, we don't see quite why we do.